How's everybody doing? So I prepared a special video about drugs and some other stuff to lead off this presentation. And if I can get the audio working, I was supposed to have an audio cable up here, but I'm going to try to hook the microphone up to it. And if that works, we're going to lead off with that. Then I'm going to go into my presentation. So just bear with me here, and we'll see if we can get this working. So that's my entire presentation. You guys can all go home now. All right, so my name is Mike Herschel, and the reason I put together that video is because it's a pretty boring subject, and I wanted to do something that kind of gets people interested. And I thought, what else but a Mr. T video, because he's my childhood hero. It's pretty awesome. So, all right, there we go. So in this presentation right here, we're going to talk about why does website speed matter. I'm not going to dwell on that because you guys are already in here. We're talking about back-end tuning. That's a lot of the server stuff. Some Drupal tuning, some front-end tuning, which is really, really important, and some testing. So who here is a back-end developer, like back-end PHP developer? Cool. Who here would qualify themselves as a site builder? And who here is front-end developer? All right. Well, the front-end developer, you guys are the coolest because I'm a front-end developer, and that's where the most important part of optimizing your website's going to be. So we're going to talk about this. So a couple of cool statistics here, if you're not already sold on making Drupal faster, is Google discovered that adding a half a second to your search result page decreases their ad revenues by 20%. So that's a lot of money. Amazon found that additional 100 milliseconds decreased sales by 1%. That's a heck of a lot of money, especially on the scale of Amazon and Google. This graph right here, this is Walmart.com, and the line that is the most important right here is the red line. And what that is that's a conversion rate. And for those of you who don't know, conversion is when you make a sale or the customer does what you want them to do. So you can see between 0 and 1 second page load time, that conversion rate's sky high. It drops off more in half, 1 to 2 seconds, 2 to 3 seconds. So there's a huge business case in making your website super fast. If you can get that page load time in less than 1 second, you're going to have higher conversion rate dramatically, and that's the goal, right? To make money, especially on e-commerce. So that's even more important for mobile. An interesting stat is 90% of the response time happens on the front end for mobile, and with mobile, you're competing with native apps too. If you're doing a mobile app or a mobile website, you're competing with technologies that are inherently faster. A great way to think about this, and a great quote, is mobile first equals mobile performance first. So what that means is start thinking about performance during the design process, during the theming process. So this is, I'd say maybe the second best band out of the 70s, for those of you who don't know. Black Sabbath. So the reason I brought them up is because keep it simple, stupid. So one of the things that's really important to realize within Drupal is don't throw, if you have a slow website, don't throw complexity at it. If your website is slow and you don't have a lot of visitors and you don't know why it's slow, don't throw caching at it. Now we're going to talk all about caching and speeding things up, but figure out why it's slow. And that means actually troubleshooting the actual issue, and we can talk about that a little bit too. But a lot of times that involves profiling using like XHProf or something similar to that. So we're going to get into some of the server stuff right now. And all of this stuff, I'm going to kind of gloss over because there's absolutely no way that we can cover all this stuff in 50 minutes. So within Apache, lower your max clients value. So what that does is by default within Apache, the max clients is set to somewhere like 150 or 250, I don't even know. But it's optimized for serving static pages that have low memory. So Drupal, it's a memory hog. It eats memory for breakfast. And so you need to lower that, or it can actually bring down your server, which I have found out before. So I have this fancy, really difficult arithmetic up there. And that will give you an idea of what to set your max clients. But typically, it's somewhere around 15, 20, depending on your memory. We're going to talk about databases, right? Most people use MySQL. There's a great website, MySQL Tuner. Has anybody used MySQL Tuner? A couple in the back. That's awesome. So if you bring up this website right now, it'll actually bring up the actual Perl script. So you can go to it. If you're in your server, you can wget mysqltuner.pl. It'll pull down this Perl script, and you can run this Perl script. And it's not going to make any modifications because that would be like really, really idiotic. But what it will do is it will analyze your my.cnf, and it'll analyze some query logs, and it'll analyze your system. And it will make great suggestions. And these suggestions are a really good place to start off with, and it'll give you a really good starting point. Another great starting point is the Percona configuration wizard. So you go to this website, it's going to ask you stuff about your website. It's going to ask you, hey, what are you doing with this website? Tell me about your server. Tell me about your application stuff. And it's going to give you a sample my.cnf that you can plug in and tweak and all that great stuff. The default database engine for Drupal 7 is Nodb. If you're in Drupal 6, convert your database tables to Nodb. You can Google on how to do that. It's going to be a little bit faster for reading and writing operations. Increase the Nodb buffer, I think it's buffer pool size. That is a value in the my.cnf, and what it does is you want to increase that as much as you practically can within your memory. Because what that will do is it will actually store your queries, your table, your data tables and stuff within the memory, which obviously if you're not touching the hard disk, it's a heck of a lot faster. MySQL Query Cache, if you enable that, and there's a couple of different steps to enable that, that can speed things up in certain situations, depending on your other layers of caching. And check your slow query logs. Mr. T said that one. And that video from Mr. T was put together by him, not me, just so you guys know. Server-side caching, right? So this is your default. We're still talking about a little bit of server stuff right here, but this is your default kind of Drupal web CMS setup right here. You have the guy in the upper left who represents me, talking to the web server, Apache, talks to PHP, which interprets Drupal, which pulls data out of MySQL. So every time you go through these arrows right here, and you go all the way to the end, it takes a little bit of time. If you can cut down that time, obviously your rendering time for that initial HTML page is going to go down. So the first thing that a lot of people do is they enable either Memcache or Redis, and they both do about the same thing, at least in Drupal world, where what it'll do is it'll cache a lot of your SQL queries and your data going back and forth. So every time you don't have to wait in the database, this stuff sits in your memory. Well, hey, that's a lot faster. Especially if you're having MySQL problems, or if your MySQL server is overloaded. Well, this can make a huge difference. Drupal will actually, if you have page caching turned on in Drupal, which you should, Drupal will actually store the entire HTML page within the cache tables. Drupal will move the cache tables over to Memcache or Redis. All right, talking about APC. You might not have seen this up there, but there's a little guy showing up right in front of PHP right here. That's opcodecaso. So you should be using this. Like, no matter what, you should be using this. Your host should be using this. This is, what it does is Drupal has like a couple thousand PHP files or something like that. I'm not even sure, especially if you get like a whole bunch of modules in there. And if you can load those into memory, so every time you have a page request, it doesn't need to scan each file, well, hey, that's just a huge win right there. That's what APC does. So, hey. Go ahead.
I've seen that APC can also replace Memcache if you have a single server. Is that true? And how can you
APC can replace Memcache. You can put whatever data you want in APC, but best practice is to use Redis or Memcache to do that. I've seen a couple discussions, and the place to really ask that question is on the high-performance groups.drupal.org. The people who lurk in there will know a lot more and be able to answer that a little bit better. When you're configuring APC, you want to increase there's a apc.ini, or it's going to be at the bottom of your php.ini, and you want to increase the APC string size. And what that is that's the amount of memory that APC can load these files into. If that's too low, it's going to actually negatively affect your website, which, that's not the point of this, right? Reverse proxy cache, this is Varnish. A lot of people use Varnish. If you're using Pantheon, Acquia, or something like that, you're probably using Varnish and you might not even know it. And what that is it's called a reverse proxy. And so what will happen is when an anonymous user tries to go to your website, it will touch Varnish, and if Varnish has that data, well, it's not even going to go to Drupal. Varnish will just respond, and bam, it's done, right? And every time you can take a load off of Apache or Drupal or anywhere in there, that's huge. That's big. And then a very, very important thing is throwing a content delivery network up there. And if you can do that, that kind of acts similar to a reverse proxy, but it does it in a distributed way, and it also distributes it across multiple servers, which can speed your front-end downloading. So this is my favorite slide right here. So this is Salt and Pepper, right? The guys or the girls who did Push It. That's a great song. I love the 80s and 90s, I don't know. 70s. I span all the decades right here, right? Except maybe the 2000s. I don't know. Go ahead.
You showed that long chain, there's lots of components along the way. If you do all of that, I mean, a lot of it becomes redundant, right? Because
it does.
You have this and this and this and this and this, everything, right?
Yeah, it does become redundant, and in certain cases, that there is a negative effect where if you actually update your content, it takes a little bit to go live, right? Because it has to bypass all the caching levels. But you can set up different methods where if you update your content or post your content, it'll maybe clear out a certain cache a little bit earlier and stuff like that. But and that's a really good point. But some of that does become redundant, but at the same time, the benefit outweighs the negative in that in certain cases. So let's talk about Drupal, right? So this is a pretty familiar page to everybody. If it's not familiar, get out. If you don't know what this is, I'm just kidding. You can stay, because I'm going to explain it to you. So caching pages for anonymous users, right? That's something that you should check right here. It does exactly what you think it does. It caches your pages for anonymous users. It also throws your, if you're using Memcache or Redis, it'll throw that into Memcache or Redis. It'll throw those pages, which is a lot quicker, right? Caching blocks. So you want to cache your blocks. Now this doesn't work exactly the way you think it does, because if you have blocks with views, and of course views is the one that's really like hitting the database, it won't cache those by default. You have to explicitly enable that within your views blocks. So, but you want that checked. And you also have to set a minimum cache lifetime for your block caching to work. That's something I actually did a little bit of testing. I didn't know that until I actually did a little bit of testing and found that out. Expiration of cached pages. All this does is it sets the HTTP response code or HTTP header, and it will tell Varnish, it will tell your browser when these pages expire. It won't actually affect your stuff on the server except for that. Use PHP to gzip your HTML. So what gzip does, and I'm going to go into this in a little bit, is it's kind of like zipping up your text files and your HTML files before downloading into your browser. So it saves bandwidth, it'll lower your file size by a factor of 10. That's something that you typically want. Now you want to check to see if your web server is automatically doing it. If it's not, if it is automatically doing it, you don't need to keep that checked. Yeah, well, and it might have something in there that detects that. I don't really know, but all right. I've seen like live Drupal websites, because I'm kind of a big nerd, right? So when I see like a new Drupal website, like for example, you guys know that the new MSNBC launched on Drupal last week. That's a big deal, right, for Drupal? So first thing I do is I view the source and I'm inspecting stuff. And man, if their stuff isn't aggregated, I'm pissed. It's like, what the hell are you guys doing, But MSNBC was. Go ahead. I don't believe it does.
But the other settings affect Varnish.
The one setting that affects Varnish is the expiration of cached pages right there. That will affect Varnish. But within Varnish, if you're setting it up yourself, you have a VCL file, and it really kind of matters on how that works. And I'm pretty sure the VCL file can even override like your expiration of cached pages value and stuff like that. Go. Oh, so these two values right here, aggregate and compress your CSS files and aggregate your JavaScript files. So what these two files, or what these two settings do is, by default, you'll have maybe 10, 20, a lot more CSS files. Each module will have their own CSS file. So every time you go to your web page, it has to download each one of these files individually. And there's a lot of overhead every time you download something. We're going to talk about that in a bit. So what that checkbox does is it aggregates them into a smaller number of files. It'll do 4 or 5 files, and the same thing with JavaScript. And so that's obvious, that's a lot faster, because it's a lot quicker to download one larger file than multiple smaller files. This is views caching. So this is the little advanced pane on the right of views. When you create a new view, or you go into your view, you have the advanced on the right-hand side. You have to click it, and it shows you all these options over here. So we're going to talk about some of these options right here. So within views caching, you have a little caching option right down here, right? So by default, within views, you have an option for time-based caching and a couple subset options in there that are pretty interesting, right? Because you want to cache stuff. That's important, because Drupal, as you saw that slide earlier, it's kind of it's slow as balls, So you have your query results, and so the query results caches the database. It does pretty much what you think it does. The rendered output will cache the rendered output, right? But what's really interesting is the rendered output, when you go to a view that has the rendered output set, it will actually check either the database or the query results cache to see if any data has changed. If the data has changed, at that point, it will actually rerun the query. So that's something that is not, you know, it's not something that everybody knows. It's an interesting little tidbit. Block caching. So if you have a views block, this is where you turn it on right here, and you can see the different options in there. They're pretty straightforward. You have, you know, you can cache per row and stuff like that. But that's something to be aware of. I'm not going to go into this because it's straightforward, but be aware of that. So talking about contrib right here. So this is where you can go wrong. So this is a website that we'll rename nameless. So these are all enabled modules right here. And I'm going back now. So what do we have? We have like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 pages of enabled modules. So this was a code base that we kind of inherited, and you know, when you have like a code base that you inherit, you don't want to uncheck a box because even if it doesn't blow up now, it might in the future. And I actually added this. I went through and I found some low-hanging fruit that I was able to disable, and I took it down from like 190 modules to around 170. I don't know if it made a difference. So this is kind of, you know, what I tell people not to do. But, you know, there's modules that can help out, right? It's the beauty of contrib. So we're going to talk about some of these modules that can really, really kind of speed up your site. So a favorite one of mine is Views Light Pager. So you know the pager at the bottom of your views, it'll show, you know, page 1 of X and next, previous, and all that. So by default, within your views pagers, it'll show page 1 of 16, page 1 of whatever. But every time it shows that 1 of whatever has to do with SQL count. And that doesn't matter if you have like a couple hundred results, but if you have tens of thousands results, oh, that can start slowing stuff down. So what Views Light Pager does is it will actually just give you a next and previous button. So it doesn't do that actual count, and in situations like that, it can dramatically speed up your rendering of your view. All right, so this is Boost. You go and buy it, you can buy it at the local Publix. It's the only Drupal module they sell there. Or you can download it, I recommend that. So Boost does kind of what Varnish does, but it's like a cheap poor man's Varnish, right? So it will cache your rendered output for anonymous users, and instead of throwing it in memory, it'll actually put it into a directory within your web root. And so Apache will serve that up as opposed to running it through Drupal. And that can dramatically speed up your website right there, right, for anonymous users. And like if you're using GoDaddy or something else that's a shared host, you know, check it out. It works out pretty well. Auth-cache. Auth-cache is incredibly complex caching for authenticated users. So caching for authenticated users and scaling to like really crazy levels of authenticated users is incredibly difficult. What Drupal.org does on a day-to-day basis blows my mind. Every single page that they render there is customized to you. So how do you cache that? You know, Auth-cache has a couple interesting ways that they do it. It involves using AJAX and a couple different other ways that you can see by these flowcharts right here. So if that is a problem for you, look into this and read the documentation for that, because it's kind of complex. Entity cache.
Can I ask you a question?
Go ahead.
What's the difference in what Boost does and what's already available in core Drupal?
So every time that you, if you're checking that cache pages for anonymous values within Drupal, what it will do is it'll take that rendered HTML and put it into a cache MySQL table or in Memcache or something like that. And so what happens is your user will connect to Drupal. They'll still run through a certain amount of Drupal and then run to that cache table, and then the page will get served. Now, the way that Boost works is Boost will put that page in an actual gzip file within your web root. And what will happen is Apache, if that file exists for that page, Apache will not even touch Drupal. Within the htaccess file, it will actually redirect the user's browser to serve up that file. So it completely bypasses Drupal, which is great. Entity cache. Entity cache is a pretty cool module. If you have complex, data types where you're doing like a lot of entity references and stuff like this, it can really help out under certain situations, and it really helps you to scale. It's not good in it's not something that you're going to want to enable all the time, and there's a really good discussion right here on groups.drupal.org under the high performance group that talks about that, and they do a little bit of testing, but it's definitely something to mention. Image API optimize. So if you're too lazy to optimize your own images, right? So this will do it for you. It supports third-party services. Shoot your images over through those, brings them back, and then you have an optimized image. And reducing bandwidth is a very, very crucial part of making your website faster. Advanced CSS and JavaScript aggregation. They call it it's on this project page, it's the holy grail of aggregation. And they just released a stable release earlier this month, which is amazing. So they can pre-gzip and compress your CSS files. So if Drupal's doing this compression, it can handle that for you and leave it gzip right there. It bundles your CSS and JavaScript into one or more files. By default, Drupal will create like 4 or 5 different CSS files that you download. But within advanced aggregation, you can set it to download just one CSS file where it's all together. You can group it by media queries. You can group it by several other options, and it supports minification, and it's a pretty cool module right there where you can really cut down on your HTTP requests. All right, so troubleshooting, right? Everybody uses Devel. Devel has a lot of speed options in there. It shows you query log. It shows your timer. It enables XHProf support if you have installed that on your server. Memory usage and page timer. So that can go a long way to telling you where the problems are, right? Especially database problems. Performance logging and monitoring enables some performance logs, and that will also help you troubleshoot any type of server performance issues right there. And a note on that is to don't use that on live sites unless you're using like Memcache or you're logging to a memory service. So front-end performance. Front-end performance is, in my opinion, I think the most important thing that we're going to talk about right here. And what's kind of cool about this is it's not really Drupal specific. It's front-end is front-end, right? And there's a couple interesting things right here. 80 to 90% of the end user response time is spent on the front end. Start there. So this guy, Steve Satters, he is the lead performance engineer at Google. So he's obviously super intelligent, and he probably drives that car. I don't know that, but I'm assuming. But if I was a performance engineer, I'd friggin' have a Lamborghini. Does it? Cool. Well, maybe the Lamborghini drives itself. So this is kind of a simple waterfall graph. You can see these through Chrome tools. You can see these through Firebug and stuff like that. And so what you see up here is that first little bar up there, that's Drupal generating that initial HTML page. And all these subsequent bars that you see down here are all the assets downloading. You're going to see images, some CSS files, some JavaScript files, and all that being downloaded. This big green line right here is where the page actually starts looking like something. And then at the very end right down here, that's where that's the end of it when everything's downloaded. So you can take a look at this right here, and you can see that the back end is generated relatively quickly to the front end. And this is pretty much in all websites here, unless you have a really, really slow, Drupal install. And if so, that's what you need to troubleshoot using those methods I talked to you about earlier. So, but you really want to concentrate your effort in the front end. All right. So, yeah, go ahead.
Are browsers going to cache that stuff on the client side?
Typically, yeah. Remember that setting where it says like lifetime cache or what's into performance? You can set your browser to cache you can set your browsers to cache your assets right there.
So if I want to test this, I want an incognito session.
Yeah, you can do an incognito session to test it. Another thing that you can do is when you're in Chrome Tools, if you hit the little gear at the very bottom right, there's a checkbox that says disable cache when the Chrome Tools is open. And if you check that box, then it's gonna ignore that. So what you want to do is every single one of those bars right there is an HTTP request, right? So what is an HTTP request? Well, I said every single one of these bars right here. And at the very bottom, it'll show you how many you have. In this case, we have 76. And so we're going to talk a little bit about this, but part of the front end involves limiting these HTTP requests and limiting your bandwidth. So how do you do this, right? So a cool quote is the fastest HTTP request is the one that's not made. That's Chris Coyier, who is a very intelligent person. Modern browsers are limited to 6 connections per server. So if you have, for example, 76 HTTP requests right there, it's going to download only 6 at a time. So it's going to download the 6, then another 6, and then another 6. So it makes a lot of sense to kind of limit those, and there's ways around it that we're going to talk about in the future, in a little bit. You want to theme and design your website with this in mind. That's where it starts. You know, don't use fancy background images unless you really want to. Want to. I mean, design's important, but think about how fast it's going to render. You know, and there's a trade-off. You know, you don't want crazy animations and everything if it's going to slow down your website, because then your conversion rates go down. CSS image sprites. CSS image sprites combine your background images into one large image, and so instead of downloading 6 background images, you're downloading 1 image. That's awesome. Inline images right here. So you can actually you can encode your images into your CSS files, which then will hopefully be getting gzipped, right? You use icon fonts. Icon fonts are an amazing, cool tool where it's a font, but instead of letters, right, it has icons. So my favorite font is called Font Awesome, you know, and it's an open source project. I think it might be part of Bootstrap or something like that. But it has pretty much every single icon that you ever want to see, like a little calendar icon, a star icon, you know, all that goofy stuff. Aggregate your damned CSS and JavaScript. That's Mr. T again. That's an actual quote. You stay in school. Image sprites. Let's touch on this again. Combine all your background images into one image. It uses the background position property to move the background image into the correct place. It's a pain in the butt, but it's worth it. SAS and Compass will do it for free, right? So there's ways within SAS and Compass to have that automatically generate your image sprite for you, and it makes it painless. So, as I touched upon earlier, you can actually embed your images into your CSS file or your HTML file even if you want.
There's pros and cons to it.
Yep, there are definitely pros and cons, and we'll talk about that in a little bit too. A quick warning on that, IE8 supports only 32 kilobytes or less, which you don't even want to touch about because there is pros and cons. So it saves an HTTP request. That's a pro. That's a big pro. He's kind of giving like a little shrug. But if you do that, your CSS file will be cached. It makes your CSS and HTML file longer, but you're gzipping it, which it should be, and it's a pain in the butt, except for SAS and Compass, which can do it for free. Now, there was a blog post, I think, on maybe Mobify's website a couple months ago, and they talked about rendering your base64 encoded images within it, and it takes a little bit longer. But if you're using smaller images, it can make a difference, you know. And I'm not saying to use this over image sprites because that work still needs to be tested, and it might be a kind of a negligible thing, but you need to use one or two of these techniques. So you want to spread your HTTP requests across multiple servers. As I mentioned earlier, you have 6 parallel HTTP requests per server. So the key part of that is per server, right? So if you're using, if you have your assets across different servers, if you have 3 different servers, well then it can do 18 parallel downloads, and that's obviously that's a lot better than 6. So a CDN really helps out that. What I always try to do is I always try to use Google's CDN for jQuery, and you can do this through this really quick template.php function. And the cool part about using Google's CDN is that a lot of websites do it. So there's a decent chance that that jQuery is already cached within the client's browser, and if so, well, hey, that just saved you some download and an HTTP request right there.
Question.
Go ahead.
That 6 per server, is that per domain or per IP?
Per domain. So
If I have multiple domains all pointed at a single IP,
it will bypass that limitation. That is correct, yeah. And so if you're using CDN1, CDN2, CDN3, but they're all pointing to your actual thing, you can download 18 at a time.
So it's per host, not per domain.
Yeah. Well, per domain name, right? Host name, yeah.
MySite.com, cd2.mysite.com.
Yeah. Yeah.
The host name.
All right, this is kind of scaring me here. Content delivery network, right? You should be using the content delivery network. Some of them can be absurdly cheap. Actually, let me go back. I want to leave this up for a little bit longer here just because it's important. Another thing that CDNs do is they will locate your assets physically closer to you, which is better, right? It's latency. Mobile latency is a huge killer. And this is I'm kind of getting off topic right here. But every time your cell phone needs to open up a session, it takes a long time to open up that internet session. And the cell phone towers will actually tell your phone when to turn off as opposed to vice versa, or turn the radio off. And it gets really complicated, but if you can streamline that latency and have less HTTP requests in mobile, it's great. So we're going to talk about making efficient HTML markup. And I know all you guys are chuckling because Drupal's markup isn't quite efficient, right? You have maybe about 10 nested divs every single image, and if you go into panels, oh my God, So it's not so easy to do with Drupal, but there are obviously ways to do it. Use a minimal base theme. There's a number of base themes out there that will put those wrapper elements in there, such as Omega-3 and Adaptive Theme and some other ones that have especially a lot of GUI tools. Modify views to output your semantic HTML elements. So within views, instead of using multiple divs, you can output just an H2 tag, or you can remove that wrapper div in there, and that's included in Views Core now. It used to be in a submodule called Semantic Views. Use the Fences module. Fences module is fantastic. And what this module will do is you'll define a field and you'll say, every time this field appears within Drupal, I just want to use an H2 tag, or I want to use a section tag or something like that. And that will even translate into your views. One thing that I forgot to mention, when you're looking for a minimal base theme up there, a couple ones to check out are Aurora and Omega-4. Come on. The time it takes to download your website is too damn high. So this is another attempt to get through this dry subject right here, right? By putting super crappy memes in there. So lower your bandwidth, right? Go.
What's better about Omega-4 than Omega-3?
Omega-3 is really GUI based. Omega-3 has a lot of different options in there that you configure through the settings of your theme. So within Omega-4, you have to explicitly do that stuff within code. which is a little bit more difficult, especially if you're kind of newbie at it, but at the same time, you won't have all those wrapper elements and stuff like that, which to me is pretty important. So, go ahead. So, lower your bandwidth. Make sure your host is gzipping your static assets. I'm going to show you how to do that. Make sure your static assets are able to be cached by your browser. I'll show you how to do that. Optimize your images. I'll show you how to do that. How much time do we have left? All right, so I'm going to get through this pretty quick right here. Thanks. JPEGs. JPEGs are actually typically a little bit smaller than PNGs. If you can use a JPEG, use a JPEG. Try not to use a lot of images. And don't load your images into mobile CSS. You know, everybody should be kind of leaning toward maybe a mobile first design and theming process. If you're using a big background image, you know, put that in the breakpoint for the large width screens, not the smaller width screens. Use responsive image solutions. There's a couple of really cool responsive image solutions that work really well with Drupal. And what these will do is these will load smaller images for smaller screens, which is, you know, great because a smaller image takes a lot less time to download. A couple cool ones are the Borealis responsive images, which is Borealis. That module does a couple other things, including that, and client-side adaptive images. And check them out, experiment, and see which one fits you. Efficient CSS markup right here. So the way that browsers interpret CSS is they kind of work from like a right to left method. And what they'll do is they'll actually, if you're doing something like this third bullet right up here, it takes a lot longer to kind of interpret that and to scan through your markup to see exactly what it's doing, and to make those styles. So you don't want to do something like that. You want to use, you know, ID selectors if possible, because once they find that, they know that's the only one on the page. And you don't want to use your main navigation instead of main navigation list item A. You know, CSS selectors, they can also take a little bit more time to render. Efficient JavaScript. So JavaScript can really slow down. Everybody's had your browser lock up with JavaScript, especially if you run Internet Explorer 6, and which I do. And JavaScript page execution time takes a lot longer on mobile devices because they have a smaller CPU that needs to stay battery efficient. You can defer your JavaScript, and there's a couple different ways to do that. And there's also this cool website right here, JSPerf, that's a way to kind of do some testing and stuff. There's a whole bunch of ways to really optimize this if you're a JavaScript person, but you need to keep it on your mind. You need to start thinking about it early in the process too. And you can Google it and figure out a whole bunch of different ways, but it just needs to be on your mind. I don't even know what that is. So I Googled like Chrome tool and I came up with this guy. So if we have time, I'm just going to do a quick overview of Chrome tools. And I don't even know if I'm on the internet here, so I might have to skip this, but we'll see what happens. If I can get on here. I don't know if this is going to work. We're going to skip this and kind of go into like the question and answers part. So let's get to the very end here. The cat. So a couple of resources I have right here that are really cool. I want to port. The most important thing I can tell everybody is the high performance on Drupal.org. That's super great discussions in there. Beginning Guide to Caching Data, that's an article written by Jeff Eaton, and that's, if you're a module developer, that's important. Back end, so performance and scalability is great. Free video on Drupalize.me, that is fantastic. The second bullet up here, 2bits.com, this is a certified genius that's in the Drupal community that talks about kind of streamlining and simplifying your Drupal installations. A cool article right here that helped me out a lot is the virtualization environment, Zen versus Virtuoso, and how one of them is faster. I'm not going to tell you which one, you're going to have to look at that. Front-end resources, Steve Souders is obviously extremely awesome because he drives a Ferrari. Chris Collier is super awesome. Let's do simple stuff to make our websites faster. That's a great article. He has a presentation that goes along with that. So in closing right here, tonight's after party, right? There's going to be beer and stuff. That's cool. Thanks to Drupal Camp Atlanta and all the sponsors. Florida Drupal Camp, which I'm a part of, right here has been announced. It's March 8th. But even before then is Drupal Camp Chattanooga, which sometime coming up pretty soon here. November 9th. Drupal Camp Chattanooga is November 29th, and I heard that their internet isn't very fast there, but they're making do. Go Gators. Twitter, and remember, aggregate your CSS and stuff. So, yeah, that's all I have. Thank you. Does anybody have any questions? In the back?
I've got one about CDNs. Do you have a favorite module for client uploaded images? We've got about 200,000 images on the site, and these need to be pushed to a CDN.
Ooh, that's a really good question. To me, that would almost come down to pricing. You know, is it the CDN module? I think handle, and honestly, I might not be the best person to answer this. So the answer is I don't really have a favorite module. You know, I have, yeah. So go ahead. What's that? You said under Windows? All right, so the question is optimizing under Windows and IIS, and I've actually have a website on IIS. Thank you, Mike. And the answer is within IIS, you can do opcode caching, and you can also do, it does gzipping and stuff like that. You can set up Memcache and stuff like that under Windows. So most of this stuff does have a Windows version. There's also a Windows group.drupal.org that talks about it and stuff. You might want to join and ask some questions there. Thank you, everybody.